Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I am a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, and this is Pints with Aquinas. But you knew that. Now let me tell you other things that you know. First, I wrote a book. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. It's a book about how to identify the end of one's life, pursue the means to that end, grow in virtues, specifically prudence, as a way by which to become bold, certain, and confident in the exercise of those human activities which lead to our flourishing. That is a summary of the book. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you profit from it, and you'll find a link to it in the description of the video. Second, I contribute to a podcast called Godsplaining, and we are having retreats this summer in July and August for all comers, for young adults, for young men, and those retreats are posted at godsplaining.org, so go and check them out and apply, and I will look forward to seeing you there. Boom. All right. In this video, we're just going to talk briefly. He says ironically because he's not capable of doing anything briefly. We're just going to talk briefly about, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the death penalty. Why? Because Thomists love talking about the death penalty, kind of, but also because we did a past video on self-defense, and so now we are perfectly positioned to do a short video on the death penalty while assuming some of the things that have gone before. So with those principles in tow, we can head on to some arguments. So here we go. So then a quick recap of what we said about self-defense. Why are we able to defend ourselves even by exercising lethal force against an unjust aggressor? Question. Well, it's because the order of love dictates that I am more responsible for my own well-being than I am for that of another. Again, there's a kind of Christian logic which says I should love God, others, and then self in that order. But, as St. Augustine explains, the principle of unity is union, okay? So the principle whereby I am joined with others in the body of Christ is in fact the union that I enjoy as an individual who has that grace and that virtue poured into his heart from the love of God. But this is something, without even thinking about the supernatural order, which is operative on the natural order. So God is more present to me than I am to myself, but then I am next most present to myself. And then members of my family, my friends, those with whom I am engaged in intermediate associations, those people are, in union with me. And as a result of which, we enjoy a kind of unity. And I am responsible for the protection, right, for the defense of that unity. And so when he talks about self-defense in Secunda Secundae of the Summa Theologiae, question 64, article 7, he says that you can exhibit or you can express or you can use even lethal force in defending yourself from an unjust aggressor. So you don't intend to kill the other person, but you intend to use whatever proportionate force to repel that unjust attack because you're responsible for yourself and you are, you have the right or you have what would you say? You have the means to defend. So in light of that then, when we talk about the death penalty, we're basically talking about the right of the polity to defend itself from an unjust aggressor who would be a criminal who imperils the common good of that society. In order to understand this, a brief word about the common good. First, the common good is a good, which means that it represents a kind of perfection, which is seen as desirable, and which constitutes a final cause of a certain sort. So when we're talking about the common good, we're talking about that towards which the members of a polity tend on account of the fact that it represents a perfection, which draws them as desirable. All right, so then what then about it is common? Well, St. Thomas will say that the more transcendent a good is, the more it's able to diffuse its goodness to many without being diminished or divided. So an example of a kind of low good would be a pizza, all right? So if you have a pizza, you cut it into 8 slices, and then if somebody takes a slice, the pizza is thereby diminished, and it goes from being a common good, potentially, right, to being a private good. So in taking it, in consuming it, I make it my private good, and I cease to share it with the rest of those, who constitute the polity. But when we get kind of above the merely material and start getting into more transcendent goods, we discover that certain goods can be diffused to many members without being diminished. So like the good of family life, for instance, is a good that is diffused to all the members of the family, and it's not diminished on account of the fact that it is partaken of by many. So like I'm thinking of my sisters who are both married, who both have children, and each time they have another child, it's not as if their firstborn says, "You really blew it, Mom. I had all of the family's love, and now I only have half of the family's love. How dare you?" No, because that child has been entrusted with an even greater goodness in a certain sense. Yeah, on account of the fact that both of them have a firstborn daughter, on account of the fact that she has a new baby brother or sister, but also on account of the fact that the love of this family, the good of this family, has kind of grown. The good of this family has, in a certain sense, become more rich or textured or complex, and as a result of which, it's not diminished by the introduction of a new member. We might even say that it's grown by the introduction of a new member. And so, yeah, the good of that family continues to reach out and to touch each member, even as they have more children. And also, when you think about it on the flip side, think about the case of divorce. When a man and a woman get divorced and they walk away from the bond, and let's say that they have 2 children, it's not as if each member of the family takes a quarter of the good of the family, right? I mean, there's a certain sense in which none of them take any of the good of the family because the bond is dissolved, all right? And the family, as a result of which, is kind of destabilized, right? So it's not as if you can cash out in the way that you can cash out on a pizza. Okay, so the common good is both good, which is to say it's a desirable perfection, which represents a final cause, and it's common, which is to say that it's actually dispersed or actually distributed among many members without itself being diminished in a crassly materialistic way. All right, so then when St. Thomas will go on to describe the common good, and as one of his principal expositors, Charles Duconic, explains it, as recently made more available or made more popular by the preaching and teaching of Father Aquinas Gilbo at the Dominican House of Studies. The common good is just the order of the relationships that obtain among the members, all right, and then which orient those members to yet higher societies. So in the case of the polity, it's the order of relationships that obtain among, like the members of the different families, and then among the families, and among all of those persons who constitute the body politic and make it up, but which make of their union something bigger, something greater, something more transcendent than just the mere aggregate of members, right? And then which orders them to a kind of higher body, a higher common good, which would be, for instance, like that of the church, okay? Although that's a contentious issue as to how that relationship transpires, we can just kind of leave it at that. So what we're talking about here is a common good, and as a result of which, St. Thomas will describe it as a kind of moral person, or it has a kind of moral personality. And so for this reason, we talk about the state, or we talk about the body politic as invested with certain rights and responsibilities, as kind of bearing a certain dignity, as bearing a certain personality, as bearing a certain kind of like weight, as it were, in the world. And so those who are charged with the care of this body politic, whether that be like elected officials or appointed officials, whether it be a king or whether it be a prime minister, or whether it be a president, or whether it be, a judiciary, legislative, executive branch, however it, kind of plays out. Those persons are constituted as, like governing the body politic in light of the fact that it has a kind of coherence, that it has a kind of unity. And part of that is that it can, like a private individual, defend itself. All right, it can defend itself from unjust aggressors. One of the places in which we see that is in just war theory. Okay, so if one sovereign nation attacks another sovereign nation without just cause, right, or for unjust causes, that nation, which defends itself, can launch or can prosecute a war against the unjust aggressor, provided that it is legitimately constituted, provided that the one who has care of the body politic, kind of does this in an orderly fashion, and that you do it with a good object and towards a good end, okay? So that's the basic shape of the thing. Just war is the place in which we see this most commonly, or the place in which we kind of think about this most commonly. But as it concerns the death penalty, we're talking about the right of the body politic to protect itself from an unjust aggressor within. So let's say there's a criminal who, has killed X, Y, Z number of people within the life of this particular society, and then we capture this prisoner, and then we're making a judgment as to his guilt and then as to his punishment. And in the course of that determination, we find, we just don't have the means to support this person for however many years with imprisonment, or like in an incarcerated state, because yeah, we don't have a prison, or we don't have a police force, or we don't have the material means to kind of like, as it were, pay somebody to live when we ourselves are struggling to get by. So the reasons for which might be numerous, but the basic idea is we don't have the means to continue to defend our society from this unjust aggressor. And so we are legitimated in making the determination that this person should be killed as the punishment for the guilt incurred by whatever crime was committed, and as reflecting the judgment that we cannot support this individual for an interminable number of years. So that's the basic shape of the teaching. Now, mind you, this teaching has been nuanced in recent papacies. So St. John Paul II kind of started advancing the ball and saying that the reasons or the situations in which we can envisage a state that is not able to support somebody for an extended period of time are increasingly diminishing. All right, so the space for it, or the space in which corporal punishment of this nature would be exacted, it seems to be shrinking. All right, and the reasons that he sets forward is also because of an increased or because of a deepened understanding of the dignity of all human persons, even of the unjust aggressor, like even of the malefactor. So he kind of linked it up there with our understanding of just like a consistent pro-life approach, right? Not like a seamless garment pro-life approach, but in the sense that, all right, if we are pro-life, then we should do what lies within our means to perpetuate the life. Of course, not like to crazy lengths of whatever, like medical, what's the word that I'm looking for? You get what I'm saying. Or maybe you don't, but I'm going to keep going regardless. All right, so we should try to defend these persons' rights to continue to live, right? For their spiritual good, for their physical good, etc. And then this came to a head recently, maybe like 4 years ago, when Pope Francis changed the paragraphs in the catechism that concern this particular teaching so as to push it even farther off, or push it more towards the kind of fringes of church doctrine. So there still is a legitimate right to defend itself, which is rooted in this right to self-defense, which we see specifically in just war theory, which Pope Francis has also made comments upon. But that prudentially, given the nature of development that we've seen within the world in the 21st century and the many means that sovereign nations have to defend themselves against potential aggressors, whether that be a penitentiary system, a police force, or like material support and substance that can be rendered unto this individual on account of the fact that he or she is of infinite and unsurpassing dignity, right? Not unsurpassing, infinite dignity, or quasi-infinite dignity, right? So that would seem to suggest that we should really, really be distancing ourselves from the practice of corporal punishment, or from the practice of, the death penalty. So that, I hope, helps to make sense a little bit of maybe what you've heard in the past couple of years. Like, is the church for, is the church against? The church guards, kind of at a principled level, the right of the state to defend itself in this way by using the death penalty, but it also cautions against a kind of unscrupulous use of the death penalty for reasons that I've just described, namely that it can kind of erode or undermine our appreciation for the dignity of human life, specifically of that individual who is executed. And as a result of which, the church is saying that the state should try to distance herself from the practice. So there you go. You've got your principles in self-defense, you've got a little description of the common good, and then how that informs the practice of the death penalty, and then what we've said about it maybe in the last 20 years and how that informs our present practice and understanding. So I hope this was helpful. And yeah, this is Pints with Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel and then push the bell so that you get email updates whenever anything cool happens. Well, anything cool on this channel. Other things that are cool will happen, but they won't be given, or they won't be told you. I can't speak anymore. You won't get notifications. Moving on. All right. Also check out the podcast called Godsplaining, to which I contribute with 4 other Dominican friars. So we have episodes every Thursday, and then during penitential seasons, we have Lectio Divinae on the weekends, and then we have guests twice a month. We have live streams twice a month. Cool guests that are coming up include, we just had Sister Bethany Madonna on. We're about to have Sister Miriam Janes on. So why not? Awesome. Great time to start. And then, like I mentioned at the top of the hour, we have retreats coming up, and you can find all the details out about those at godsplaining.org, and you're the most welcome. So my prayers are for you. Please pray for me, and I will catch you next time on Pints with Aquinas.